Let's jump in and tell us what city are you watching from. Clara Carter dragged her small silver suitcase through the crowded stream of people in the Provenade International Terminal. The watch on her wrist read 8:17 a.m. While her flight to Paris was scheduled to take off at 8:30, her heart pounded wildly, her steps quickened. Morning traffic combined with an unexpected downpour had shattered her plan of arriving early, checking in calmly. By the time she finally reached the check-in counter, she was met with the apologetic look of the staff member. "Sorry, the Paris flight has closed. Boarding. You won't be able to get on the plane." Clara stood frozen for a few seconds, as if all the noise in the airport had been sucked away. She bit her lip, shoved her ticket and passport back into her bag. This wasn't some casual holiday she could afford to miss. She had to be in Paris to negotiate an important contract, one that directly affected the future of Carter Design, the small interior design firm her father had poured his life into. "Is there another flight?" Her voice came out hoarse. The staff checked the computer and said, "The next one on this route departs at 8:15 tomorrow morning, which means you'll have to wait about 24 hours. 24 hours. Clara's whole body seemed to collapse into the seat. That much time could mean missing the most important client meeting of her career. She forced herself to pull her suitcase toward the waiting area. The announcements from the loudspeakers blended with the hurried footsteps of hundreds of passengers. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the nearby Starbucks only made her mind reel. Further, Clara dropped heavily onto a blue plastic chair, bearing her face in and her hands. Just then, a deep voice came from beside her. "Flight cancelled." She startled and looked up. Sitting next to her was a man in his early 30s, tall, wearing a crisp white shirt. His tie was slightly loosened, his sleeves rolled up, one notch revealing a gleaming steel watch. His face was angular with sharp features, but his eyes were calm, as if nothing could shake him. "No," Claire replied, forcing a weary smile. "I missed it." The man raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth lifting into a faint smile, half sympathetic, half teasing. "Maybe it's fate." Clara blinked, caught off guard. The words hung in the air playfully. Yet, for some reason, they made her heart skip. "Fate?" She let out a bitter laugh. "If so, fate is being very harsh with me." He tilted his head, keeping that enigmatic smile. "Or maybe fate is giving you a chance to pause. Sometimes missing a flight can take us exactly where we're meant to be." Clara sighed and turned away. She wasn't in the mood to hear philosophy from a stranger. No matter how soothing his voice was, her mind was filled only with the image of her father, his silver hair bent over the drafting table. He had trusted her with this trip. She couldn't let him down. "It's just a flight," she whispered, gripping her handbag strapped tightly. "I'll find another way." The man chuckled softly, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. He glanced at the passport peeking out on her lap, then pointed. "Paris? What a coincidence. I missed that one too." Clara looked up in surprise. "You did?" "Yeah," he nodded. "And the next flight doesn't leave until tomorrow." Leaning back in his chair, he spoke as if sharing an amusing fact. "Which means we've just been given 24 hours. Clara stared for a moment. His words made her even more anxious, yet somehow also planted a flicker of something inside her, as if it were a invitation. She shook her head, starting to stand to look for a quieter corner. But that line kept echoing in her mind, no matter how hard she tried to push it away. Maybe it's fate. Clara was still, sitting motionless in the waiting area, her suitcase neatly placed beside her. The stream of hurried travelers passed before her eyes, but her mind felt frozen. At 8 that morning, she thought she had been on the brink of a turning point in her career. Yet, Just a few minutes late, that opportunity seemed to have slipped right out of her grasp. The man sitting next to her, still impossibly calm, leaned back in his chair, his grey eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and thought. He was silent for a few seconds, then suddenly spoke. "We have 24 hours. Clara turned to him, frowning. "You mean we have to wait for the next flight?" "Exactly." He nodded slightly, the corner of his mouth curving up. 24 hours stuck in a place no one wants to linger. To me, that sounds like a challenge or an opportunity. An opportunity? Clara let out a dry laugh. An opportunity to bury my work, my plans, my reputation right here. Instead of being offended, his gaze deepened. Or an opportunity to do something reckless we wouldn't normally dare. Clara hesitated. "What do you mean?" The man crossed his arms, leaning slightly toward her. His voice dropped, warm and low as if sharing a secret. "Let's make a pact. For these 24 hours, we don't ask for real names. We don't mention the past. We don't discuss the future. We just live in the moment and embrace this unexpected pause fate has thrown at us." Clara stared at him as if he had just said the most ridiculous thing in the world. A strange pact in an airport. Who would even think of that? She was about to refuse, but then his eyes held hers, steady, calm, yet carrying something that made it hard to look away. Amid the bustling chaos, his abruptitude and composure seemed to carve out a private space separate from everything else. "No real names," she repeated, her tone laced with sarcasm. He nodded. "No past." "That's right. No future." He smiled. "Only the present." Clara let out a long sigh. She wanted to argue, to say she didn't have time for such nonsense, but her exhausted body and drained spirit left her without the will to fight. In truth, a part of her, the part too accustomed to rules and responsibility, felt strangely tempted by the idea. 24 hours, a span of time forced out of her routine. If she couldn't change reality, why not try living differently just once? "Fine," she muttered, almost as if to sue herself. "But only 24 hours. Deal." He extended his hand. Clara hesitated, briefly, then placed her hand in his. The handshake was firm, unexpectedly, and warm. Then he released her hand, a mischievous smile flickering across his face. "Nice to meet you, Miss Coffee." "Spill." Her eyes widened. "What?" "Back at the check-in counter. You spilled coffee on my shirt." "I figured the nickname fits." Clara's cheeks flushed crimson. "That's rude. If that's the case, I'll call you Mr. Midnight Flight. Since your flight crashed and burned, just as badly as mine." He burst out laughing. The sound was deep, resonant, breaking through the heavy air between them. "Perfect," he said. "So, Miss Coffee Spill, we have 24 hours starting now." At first, Clara thought she would regret agreeing, but only minutes later she realized she felt strangely lighter. No names, no titles, no need to carry the weight of being Mr. Carter's daughter, just a woman who missed her flight, sitting next to a stranger who had missed his, too. "So, what do you plan to do with these 24 hours?" she asked. Still cautious, he leaned back, eyes drifting toward the brightly lit fast food counter in the distance. "First, breakfast. I'm starving enough to sign away my soul in exchange for a burger." Clara chuckled softly for the first time that bleak morning. "Doesn't sound like the kind of thing a white shirt, silver watch guy would say." He winked. "That's exactly why it's fun." For some reason, Clara found herself getting up with him. They wheeled their suitcases to the dual burger counter and ordered the simplest meal. Sitting at the small plastic table, she watched him fumble with the wrapper, sauce sticking to his hands. "You've never eaten a burger at Ancella Airport before?" she teased. "Actually," he looked at the burger and gave a pretty helpless laugh. "This is my first fast food meal in years." "Well," Clara arched a brow. Then today really is your destiny day. He didn't argue, just smiled, a faint dimple appearing. The light in his eyes sent a ripple through her chest. After the meal, they wandered around the terminal, a bookstore, souvenir stands, massage, chairs, and even the children's play area. Everywhere they went, there were echoes of laughter, playful banter exchanged between them. With each passing minute, Clara felt something undeniable. The noisy world outside was fading away. Here it was only her and Mr. Midnight Flight. By the time the X's wall clock struck 11, Clara realized she had completely forgotten her exhaustion and even the panic of missing the side contract. Maybe his words from the start hadn't been entirely meaningless. Maybe fate really did want her to pause for a moment. When they returned to the waiting area, Clara sat down, leaning against her suitcase. He sat across from, and her elbows resting on his knees, head tilted as he studied her. "You still don't believe in this pack, do you?" he asked. "To be honest, no," she admitted, "but I'll try. Just for today." Satisfaction flickered in his bright eyes. "Just today is enough. You never know." 24 hours can change a lot. Clara stayed quiet, staring down at her hands. Inside her, a faint unease stirred. She had never been quick to trust anyone, least of all a stranger. But something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, made her want to believe, at least for these 24 hours. The airport's shopping concourse felt like a miniature city. Bright, white lights, glittering signs, souvenir stands crammed together, the mingled scents of perfume and coffee, creating a fragrance that defied description. Clara dragged her silver suitcase, while Mr. Midnight Flight walked beside her, occasionally tilting his head to toss out random questions. "Ever tried those super intense massage chairs at airports?" he asked, nodding toward a row of glossy black seats that looked like giant beetles. "They look kind of threatening." Clara laughed. "But today is the day of first times, right?" "Exactly." He extended his hand like a tour guide. "After you, Miss Coffee." Spill. They picked 2 seats, side by side. Adrian scrolled through the buttons with the concentration of someone about to pilot a spaceship. Clara had just set hers to relax when a violent gray erupted beside her. His chair shook like it wanted to throw him off. Adrian jerked upright, fingers mashing the mash panel, accidentally switching it to Shiatsu Max. The rollers inside began, clawing furiously down his back. "Hold on. This feels less like therapy and more like assault." He gritted out, face contorted, yet still trying to look composed. Clara doubled over, laughing, so hard her eyes watered. You just activated the destroy fatigue and dignity mode. Emergency assistance?" he croaked. She leaned over and hit the power button. The chair stilled, releasing its captive. The once polished gentleman, now with ruffled hair and a crooked tie. Adrian braced his arms and sat up, inhaling like a man who had just survived a hurricane. "This is the first time I've ever been bullied by a chair," he admitted. "In return, it cured your chronic seriousness," Clara teased. "You're smiling more already." He dipped, his head slightly, amusement glinting in his eyes. "Thank you, Doctor." Coffee. The arcade section sat just behind the massage chairs. A small but lively corner featuring a boxing machine, mini basketball hoops, racing simulators, and a worn-out claw machine that chimed out tiny electronic music on repeat. Adrian stopped at the basketball game, rolling up his sleeves as if preparing for a painting. High-stakes negotiation. "You'll cheer me on, won't you?" he asked. "If you score 30 points, I'll call you Mr. Clutch instead of Mr. Midnight Flight." Clara crossed her arms with a mischievous grin. The game began. First, shot miss. Second, hit the backboard, bounced out. Third, rimmed and rolled away. Clara chuckled, biting her lip to hold it back so he wouldn't lose momentum. Suddenly, by the fourth ball, he adjusted his wrist. Swish. Then, again and again, he found the rhythm, shot sinking one after another. In the final 10 seconds, the score soared. The buzzer rang. 29. 1 short. Clara tilted, her head with mock regret, though her eyes sparkled. So close, mister. Almost. Close doesn't count, he laughed, good-naturedly, then handed her the ball. Your turn. No way. Clara started to protest, but he had already pressed start. She took a chance. First shot, swish. Second, off the board, skimmed, the rim, dropped through. She exhaled. Then, inexplicably, her hand found a rhythm. 5 in a row zipped into the hoop, the score beeping wildly. Buzzer. 31. Adrian froze for 3 seconds, then burst into laughter, clapping like a fan admitting defeat. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you, Miss Clutch. You promised, Clara said, hands on her hips, trying to stay composed though. Her cheeks burned with childlike delight. They moved on to the claw machine. Inside sat a crowd of plush cats with bows. Adrian dropped in a coin, maneuvered the claw, lowered, slip, again. Slip. This thing was programmed to sabotage human pride, he muttered. Let me try. Clara studied the angles, tilted her head, pressed for 3 seconds, released. The claw scooped a tiny white kitten, lifted, wobbled, and dropped it right into the chute. Click. The door popped open. She froze a beat, then turned, holding out the toy. For Mr. Almost Unfair, Adrian accepted it with mock gravity. You're winning. Everything today. Not yet. Clara flicked the bow on the kitten's neck. There's still one test. What's that? Photo booth. The booth stood in the corner, red curtain half drawn. Clara slipped inside first, waving for him to follow. Adrian hesitated for a breath. He didn't look like the type to jump into silly surprises, but then stepped in. The cramped space forced them close. His shoulders' warmth made Clara's heart stutter unexpectedly. The screen blinked. 3, 2, 1. Shot 1. Both smiled politely at the camera. Shot 2. Clara puckered her lips in a goofy face. Adrian blinked, in startled confusion. Caught in a rare, clumsy moment. Shot 3. Adrian mimicked her, making a ridiculous pout. Clara burst out laughing, leaning until her head touched his shoulder. Shot 4. Clara covered half her face with her hand, leaving only her smiling eyes. Adrian tilted his head, squinting, slightly, as if saving that frame just for memory. The printer word, spitting, out 2 identical strips. Clara picked one up, staring at the 4 captured moments. She folded a strip and slipped it into her wallet. The other she held it out to him. Proof of the 24 hours, she said, but no showing anyone. Agreed, he replied slowly. A harmless secret between 2 people with no past. Clara smiled, though her chest fluttered, strangely. Duty-free wire of perfume, rows of glass bottles formed sparkling towers. Clara sprayed a burst of bergamot citrus like opening a window on a fresh morning. Adrian stood at the poro and headphone display, holding up a massive pair topped with glowing cat ears. Don't tell me you're going to. Clara hadn't finished before he slipped them on, flicking the light switch. The ears blinked like runway beacons. For a moment, the world slowed. The crisp, shirted, silver-watched, handsome but cold man was standing under neon, duty-free lights wearing flashing cat ears. A clerk walking by stifled laughter until her face turned red. A boy tugged his mother's sleeve to point. Clara couldn't breathe for 3 seconds. From laughing. How do I look? Adrian asked seriously. Like the CEO of the Cat Kingdom, she gasped between laughs. Or the Prince of the Silly Squad, he nodded, solemnly without a hint of shame. Good, that's the exact title I was missing. He tapped play on a sample playlist. Pop, music bursting out. He bobbed his head to the beat, the ears blinking with every drum. Clara leaned against the counter, laughing and shaking her head. Some moments shattered every assumption. Right now all his sharp edges melted into something rare, awkward but genuine. I'll take this one, he told the clerk, removing the headset. And do you have a smaller size for someone with a smaller head? Yes, sir. The clerk chirped, fetching a mini version. Adrian paid, tucked the tiny box into a paper bag, and then handed it to Clara, lightly. Not a gift, just mandatory. Equipment for the silly squad. Sorry, I don't have a membership, she quipped. You do now. He placed the bag in her hand. Lifetime membership valid until the end of today. Clara held the bag, her heart skipping a soft note. Fine, but I'm not wearing it in public. Just once, he said, mischief sparking in his eyes. So you'll know how brave you were. They left duty-free, each carrying an ice cream cone. Sitting on the steps near the huge windows overlooking the runway, they watched the sun drop lower, gleaming on the lined-up planes. Thin, white streaks stretched across the sky, like chalk marks. Clara glanced sideways. His cuff had slid back, revealing a faint scar along his wrist. For a moment, something in her chest tightened like she had seen that somewhere before. She almost asked, then remembered the pact. No past, no future. She stayed quiet. He said nothing, only passing her a napkin when her ice cream dripped. There's one thing I'm starting to believe, he said at last, still watching the tarmac. That people don't always need to know everything about each other to understand each other. Sounds risky, Clara replied, half joking, half serious. What if we're completely wrong about each other? Then we'll be wrong for 24 hours, he said. But right in how this feels. The answer was so simple that Clara couldn't find a reason to argue. She nodded, took another bite of ice cream, the chill on her tongue warming her chest. Before and dark, they returned to the photo booth. Adrian suggested sticking one tiny photo to the back of his phone, not showing faces, just the frame where their silhouettes leaned together, laughing, to remember that there was a day, he said. The day of the silly squad, Clara asked. The day of the brave, he corrected softly. Clara tucked the other strip into her wallet. The plush kitten's bow peeked out of his bag, bobbing ridiculously with every step. She laughed again, light as breath, and, in the echo of overhead announcements, and in the neon lights and perfume drifting, into the tang of jet fuel, Clara realized, behind that calm, aloof exterior, this man held a strangely endearing, clumsy side, one he only revealed when he allowed himself to be silly. Maybe there was nothing proper, and here, violent massage chairs, conniving, claw machines, flashing cat ears. Yet, it was those very silly things that pulled her out of urgency, out of the shadow of being Mr. Carter's daughter, out of the question of what comes. All that remained was the present, and the two of them, two missed passengers learning how to laugh together. After a long day wandering through every corner of the airport, from food courts to arcades to souvenir shops, darkness finally settled over the Kaiser entire terminal. The massive glass windows reflected hundreds of neon lights casting the cold, weary glow, unique to places that never sleep. Clara pulled her suitcase along, her eyes scanning the check-in desk of a small airport hotel. The electronic board flashed full room, and she let out a groan. No rooms left. Adrian asked, standing beside her with his hands in his pockets. She shook her head, her voice tinged with defeat. All the hotels inside and around the airport are full. Probably because it's peak season. Adrian was quiet for a few seconds, then spoke softly. Then we have no choice but to stay in the lounge. Clara frowned, lips pursed. In her mind, she pictured cold plastic, benches, scattered luggage, the loudspeaker blaring every 15 minutes. The thought of spending the night there made her shiver. But seeing Adrienne remain so composed, she didn't want to appear too fragile. "Fine," she said. "It's just one night." The lounge at Bede Night was like a miniature terminal inside the larger one. The lighting was softer and rows of sofas stretched long. A few travelers were curled up, dozing fitfully, while others typed away on laptops with blurry eyes. They chose a quiet corner by the glass where they could see the yellow glow spilling onto the runway. Planes sat motionless, their metal bodies gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Clara sank into a seat, placing her suitcase by her legs before leaning back. Her whole body felt drained, her eyelids heavy. "Today was insane," she murmured. Adrian sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "Insane, but not all that bad." She turned to look at him. Under the dim light, his face still carried that steady calm, but it seemed softer, somehow. Maybe because today he hadn't been a man of power, just an accidental companion. Sleep came faster than she expected. Clara propped her chin in her hand, struggling to stay awake, but her head soon nodded. "You can sleep for a bit," Adrian said in his low, steady voice. "I'm fine. Her words were the knot swallowed by a long yawn. Clara chuckled, then leaned back, letting her eyelids close. Within minutes, her breathing had steadied, her face relaxed, brown hair falling across her cheek, lips gently pressed together. She looked both exhausted and fragile. Adrian glanced at her, silent. A strange feeling stirred within him, a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He slipped off his charcoal jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders. The act came so naturally, he didn't even need to think. "It's been a long time," he told himself silently, eyes lingering on her sleeping face, "since I've wanted to stay beside someone this much." The airport loudspeakers echoed faintly in the distance, announcing late-night flights. Adrian leaned back, head tilted toward the cavernous ceiling. For years, his life had followed the rhythm of deals, numbers, and stocks. Business dinners replaced real conversations, cold handshakes substituted for warm embraces. And yet, in a single day, with one woman who just happened to sit beside him, he had laughed at glowing cat ears, played a pointless claw machine, even accepted being Mr. Almost. Those small, foolish things had made him feel more alive than any multi-million-dollar deal. Adrian turned his head toward Clara. She shifted slightly inside, her sleep clutching the edge of his jacket as if seeking safety. His chest tightened. He wanted to reach out, brush his fingers against hers, but he held back. Instead, he rose, walked to the small cafe counter, bought a cup of hot tea, and set it beside her seat. "For when she wakes up," he told himself. Back in his chair, he pulled his suitcase closer, settling in. The lounge was unusually quiet. A few keyboard taps echoed. A child cried briefly, and then there was his heartbeat, a rhythm he hadn't noticed in years. Suddenly loud and clear. He didn't sleep right away. Instead, he sat there, letting Clara's presence draw him away from the thoughts that usually consumed him. Close to midnight, Clara stirred. She blinked, groggily, confused for a moment by the jacket on her shoulders. "You," she whispered sleepily. "Rest," Adrian answered, his voice deep and gentle. "We've got a flight in the morning." She gave a faint, drowsy smile, then closed her eyes again. Adrian turned away, but that small smile lingered like a tiny light, warming the long night. Inside him, a hazy resolve began to take shape. If fate had given him these 24 hours, he would use every minute, not to escape, but to remember that sometimes the most precious things aren't in the plan. And that night, at the airport, the night that should have been weary and dull, became one of the most peaceful nights of his life. As the clock hand crept past midnight, the airport thinned like a sheet of wool. The loudspeaker announcements grew sparse, replaced by the whir of a floor scrubber, the occasional roll of suitcase wheels, the distant cry of a child in sleep. The lights shifted to a gentler gold. No longer the blinding glare of daytime. Clara stirred from a restless nap. The charcoal jacket over her shoulders was still warm, and beside her seats had a cup of tea, no longer steaming hot, but sending up faint wisps like morning mist. She pushed herself upright, her head heavy, but her chest strangely light. Adrian sat across from her, leaning back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if his thoughts had wandered far. "You haven't slept?" Clara asked softly, careful not to wake anyone nearby. Adrian turned, his smile reaching his eyes. "I've been keeping the ceiling company for an hour," he murmured. "Want to take a walk? Feels like the whole terminal belongs to us." She looked out. The window. The runway was silent. A small luggage cart trundled past, trailing a green beam of light. Clara nodded. "Let's go." They rolled their suitcases along, steps light as though afraid to break the fragile calm of the intendee. Midnight hour, past rows of empty chairs, past a cafe shuttering its own doors, past a bookstore with one corner left open for insomniacs. Clara paused, and at the postcard rack, images of night, skylines, clock towers, iron bridges, winding rivers. Adrian picked one with a violet sky and a silver contrail, cutting through like a single thread for the silly squad member. He said, tone playful, but eyes serious. "The back stays blank. No names, no dates, just a sign." Clara chuckled. "What kind of sign?" He borrowed a pen from the clerk and sketched a tiny cat ear in the corner. She took the pen, added a miniature coffee drop beside it. They exchanged a glance, both smiling without words. They paid and tucked the card and away. They passed through the security gates, now half closed, and entered a corridor lined with black and white. Photos of travelers from decades past. Shy smiles, waving hands, hard suitcases, and felt hats. Clara lingered at one picture. Two women embracing by a gate, eyes brimming. "Looks like a promise," she whispered, "and like a farewell," Adrian replied. Strange, how sometimes the two are the same. They moved on. At the quietest corner stood a prayer room open 24/7. A small space with wooden floors, plain benches, a vast of fresh flowers, and a few books, neatly stacked. No specific symbols, just a place to breathe. They didn't step in, only stood at the threshold, gazing at it like a still pond. Something inside them both settled. "I hate being lied to," Clara said, suddenly, voice barely above breath. The words slipped out before she could stop. Them. Short, simple, enough to be heard. Adrian didn't turn right away. He kept his gaze on the pale light ahead, as if afraid a sudden move might shatter the fragile moment. "I hate losing what matters," he answered slowly, each word placed with care. That was all. Just two lines strung between them, trembling like the pluck of a string. No why, no by whom, no when. The pact remained intact, but those few words mapped an emotional terrain enough for the other to step onto. They walked on, arriving at a wall of glass facing the wind barrier. Night air rustled like a distant song. Clara pressed her palm against the cold pane. Adrian stood, close enough that she could catch the faint blend of peppermint tea and cologne. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, eyes still on the runway, "if we knew everything beforehand? maybe we'd have chosen differently. Yes, he said, but I also think if we knew everything, we'd miss the gentle surprises. Like today, a maintenance vehicle rumbled past. Lights flashing. Clara laughed. Gentle? The violent massage chair counts as gentle? Gentle to my ego, he shrugged. I learned how to lose at basketball and still be fine. And the cat ears. Exactly. Cat ears are a philosophical choice. She burst into laughter, the sound like a braided spark flicking into the night. The silence that followed softened, not endured, but shared. They stopped at a Prancis and under different 40 vending machine. Clara dug for coins and pick butter cookies. Adrian chose bottled water and a pack of mints. As the cookies dropped into the tray, she bent to grab them, his hand close by, the warmth of it brushing her knuckles. She pulled back, not out of embarrassment, but to hold on to the sensation of that fleeting touch. Some questions, Adrian said, unscrewing the bottle cap. Don't need answers, just someone standing next to you, like asking, "Are you here?" Clara looked at him, and the answer is warmth and distance. He added, the right kind of distance. Clara broke a cookie in half and offered him a piece. He took it, fingers grazing hers. This time, neither withdrew right away. One beat, then another. They let go only when the echo of the moment had settled. The corridor led to a small observation deck, crowded by day, now empty, but for them. Beyond, the glass strips of lights blinked. The sky was a velvet sheet studded with silver dust. Clara perched on the wooden step, pulling her coat tighter. Adrian sat beside her, not asking if she was cold, only laying a thin scarf from his, a suitcase across her shoulders. Sometimes, I think, she murmured, people are like airports, each with arrivals and departures, flashing boards of destinations, and we're just passengers staring up, waiting for our line to appear. Maybe, he said, but tonight we've switched the board off. No ads, no announcements, no updates, just waiting for dawn. Clara leaned back, her eyes half closed. She felt her heartbeat, slow and steady. Beside her she heard Adrian's breathing, long, even, and realized their rhythms were finding each other, like two waves meeting a flat shore, sinking on their own. She opened her eyes and glanced sideways. The faint scar on his wrist caught the nightlight, clear for an instant. She wanted to ask what had left it there, but only pinched the scarf between her fingers. The pact, no past. She smiled, letting go of the question. Somehow not knowing felt like relief, like an exhale. When I was little, Clara said, keeping her tone light, I used to watch planes and imagine each one as a story. The window seat was for the brave. The aisle seat was for the warriors. And the middle seat, Adrian asked, for the ones who accept, she replied. Accept being wedged between two worlds, but still sleep soundly. What about us? We're sitting on the wooden steps at the gate of a story that hasn't been named yet. He tilted his head, considering temporary title, questions without answers. Clara smiled. Sounds right. When they returned to the opened lounge, the clock neared 3. The terminal seemed to breathe deeper. A few new passengers arrived carrying the chill with them. Clara sat, pulled out the postcard, stared at the tiny cat ear and coffee drop in the corner. Borrowing a pen from the desk, she drew a thin line through them like a miniature contrail across the sky. A flight path, she explained. No destination, Adrian asked. Not yet. Later, she smiled. For now, it's enough to know. We're flying. He nodded as though understanding. Something deeply personal. All right, then we'll fly until morning. Clara folded the card and slipped it into her wallet. She leaned back, eyelids growing, heavy. Before sleep claimed her, she felt the faint tug of the jacket being pulled snug over her shoulders. No words, no question of, "Are you cold?" But she knew. And in the seat across, Adrian wasn't thinking about meetings, spreadsheets, or deals. He only listened to the rhythm of her breathing, telling himself without words that silence had never felt so full, that, in a place built for departures and reunions, there had been one night they chose simply to stay, just to let their hearts keep time, just to wait for dawn. Before sunrise, the airport seemed to hold its breath. A pale blue, gay light swept thinly across the glass ceiling, rows of long seats darkening into quiet striped lines. The hum of floor polishers had stopped, replaced by the soft ignition of baggage carts, their tires gliding over tiles like a ritual to wake the runway. Clara opened her eyes as the first beam of light slid across her cheek. The charcoal jacket still covered her shoulders, and beside her was a fresh cup of mint tea, warm, not the one she had left unfinished at midnight. Adrian sat across from her, holding 2 paper cups, the word mint scribbled on the lids and marker. He dipped his head in a silent good morning. Clara found herself smiling. Just that nod was enough to take the bitterness out of a mist flight. "Want to see it from the glass," he whispered. "The sunrise is here." They gathered their things, wheeling suitcases past rows of drowsy travelers. At the wide glass wall facing the runway, dawn spread in soft orange hues. The sun, round and tentative, was climbing over the hangar's edge. The thin clouds lit it up like blotting paper soaked in color. They chose a bench by the glass. The chill seeped through the backrest, but didn't sting. Outside, the ground crew began their ritual. Flag, signals, hose, attachments, cables drawn, all with the precision of choreography. "Coffee wakes you up," Adrian said, then caught in himself. "Sorry, mint tea wakes you up." "Mint works too," Clara replied, cupping her hands around the cup, warming her fingers. "Maybe mint is gentler." They sat in silence, watching the light intensify. The speakers crackled with a muffled early flight announcement, then fell quiet on the Thames. Glass, their shadows overlapped, blurred, between streaks of orange and grey. Clara instinctively pressed her palm to the window's cold surface. A warmer hand touched alongside hers, not covering, but aligned finger to finger. It felt like a perfectly framed photograph. Enough space not to suffocate. Close, enough to feel her heartbeat shift. "Do you like sunrises?" Adrian asked, eyes on the horizon. "Not before," Claire admitted. Sunrise meant work shifts, meetings, responsibilities. She inhaled, mint tingling at the back of her tongue. "But today, it just feels like light. A kind of beginning too," he said. "Not of schedules, but of courage." She glanced at him, half smiling. "Since when did you learn to say things that leave people speechless?" "Since yesterday," he answered, straight-faced. "When I wore cat ears." Clara burst out laughing, the sounds scattering like a sunbeam. She remembered the glowing ears wobbling, the massage chair fiasco, the postcard, with its tiny cat ear and coffee drop-in, the corner. Those small things had woven into a thin thread, now binding this morning together. "Miss Coffee Spill," he said softly. "If we meet again beyond these 24 hours, would you take the gamble?" The question fell between them, like a pebble skipping across water, sending ripples outward. Clara didn't answer immediately. She looked past the seam glass, at her shadow overlapping his, at a distant plane flicking on its taxi lights, its amber beams stretching like a honeyed path. Gamble was a dangerous word for someone who hated abandonment, but to gamble on whom? On a stranger who had pulled up her jacket as she slept, who knew when to stay silent, who laughed at himself. "What's the gamble?" she asked quietly, her voice brushing the rim of the cup. That's what you feel today, isn't it? Because of this terminal, Adrian said, still watching the dawn. But because of the person sitting next to you, that if we met outside this time bubble, we'd still recognize each other, not by name, not by title, but by the same silence. Clara lowered her eyes to their hands, close, but not clasped. He bore that faint scar at the wrist, light grazing, at it like a pencil mark. She remembered the pact. No past, no future. That rule had carried her lightly through the combat night. Yet, here he was stepping 1 foot into future, not with promises, but with a wager. Oddly, she wasn't afraid. Maybe because he wasn't asking for her phone number or real name. He was asking if she'd trust a feeling. The one thing they hadn't faked all day. I thought you only like certainties, she teased, buying herself one more breath. I like what's real, he corrected. So, softly it barely disturbed the air. Certainty is sometimes a net. Real is water. The sun cleared the hangar roof. Light poured over, washing his cheekbone, sharpening the bridge of his nose, glinting off the slight curve of his mouth. Clara felt a small bird flutter in her chest. She nodded slow, clear, like pressing a seal to a blank page. Then I'll take the gamble, she whispered. He turned, meeting her eyes, for the first time that morning. In the grey depths, there were no fireworks, no drama. Only the quiet of a man hearing the right answer. His hands shifted, closer. So did hers. Their fingers touched, then naturally, as breathing, intertwined. Neither counted the beats, but their hearts seemed to. There are, rules. Clara remembered aloud, still holding his hand. No names, no past, no future. We keep them, Adrian said. A wager doesn't break the rules. It just adds a prize. What prize? A round-trip ticket between two real people. The line made Clara laugh again. She closed her eyes briefly, letting mint and sunlight blend into a single flavor. Then, with no cue, they leaned toward each other. The glass behind them reflected two figures, moving closer. As their lips brushed, Clara was faintly aware of a distant announcement echoing a flight number of someone wheeling luggage quickly past, and of the buttery scent of fresh croissants wafting from an open bakery. She thought, everything else is in motion except the two of them, fixed in. At this point of time, the first kiss came, as lightly as the sun sliding over seat, edge. Not urgent, not rehearsed, not cinematic, just a touch, enough to realize their mouths had been smiling all along. His lips were cool with mint. Hers tasted of weak tea and the last trace of butter cookies from the night before. It was enough to remember. When they parted, neither rushed to speak. They looked at each other for a beat, then both laughed as the loudspeaker intruded. Passengers on flight 645, please. Like being caught in the act, their eyes followed a couple dragging a yawning child past. Life intruded, but didn't shrink the moment. It framed it. Fresh croissants, Adrian pointed, toward the bakery. Shall we call that kiss? Buttermint flavor? Sounds like a failed perfume. Clara chuckled, eyes still gleaming. But fine, just for today. They rose still hand in hand. After a few steps, they awkwardly let go, like school kids sneaking in the hall. Adrian bought 2 croissants while Clara pulled out the postcard from her wallet and with a borrowed marker drew a Costa, thin new curve across the cat ear and coffee drop. A new flight path. What's this? He asked. The root of buttermint. Flavor, she answered, cheeks pink. Back. At the bench, they split the pastries. Butter melted warm on her tongue, rich, enough to sting her eyes. She dared not think about noon or tonight. She let herself think only of this. There had been a morning in an unnamed airport when 2 missed passengers kissed at sunrise, and that was enough to rename a part of her. Are you afraid? Adrian asked suddenly. Of what? Of the gamble. Clara chewed slowly, then shook her head. "I'm afraid of being left behind," she admitted. "But I'm not afraid of saying yes to something. That makes me feel I'm in the right place." Then he murmured, "We'll meet on the other side of 24 hours. No time, no place," she reminded. "Only courage," he said with a smile. Outside, a plane rolled onto the runway, lights blinking slowly like winks. Its shadow swept across the glass, sliding over two faces, still warm from their first kiss. Clara followed it with her eyes, her heart untroubled. She didn't know his real name, his job, his birth, address, knew nothing except how he listened, how he pulled up her jacket, how he asked a question that made her want to nod. "All right," she said. Again, like pressing another seal. "I'll gamble." And that morning, amid the rumble of suitcases and the scent of hot butter, they sat by the glass, hands nearly touching as the minutes passed, like thin slices of bread. The sun climbed higher, tinting the world in a tender gold. Two missed passengers with a mint-flavored kiss had signed a wordless pact. If fate willed it, let it carry them onward from this pause. Paris. Light was unlike anywhere else. The seistu early sky was bright and clear. Yet Clara's heart felt heavy. She hurried down the hotel corridor, clutching a thick folder of documents. Breakfast had been nothing more than a rushed cup of coffee. Her stomach was so tight with nerves that everything tasted bland. Today, Carter Design, the small firm her father had spent his life building, was facing the most important meeting in its history. "Remember, sweetheart," her father had said on the phone from New York the night before, his voice trembling faintly, but his eyes full of trust. "We cannot let Carter Design be swallowed. You are my hope." That sentence made every step she took now feel weighed down with stone. The meeting room was on the hotel's top floor, sunlight streaming through a glass ceiling onto the long wooden table. Carter Design's representatives were already seated, tension etched on in their faces. At the head of the table, the large screen lit up with the logo of the corporation they would be negotiating with. Clara's breath stalled for a beat. That logo, silver stylized B, and on a black background, was too familiar. Blackwood Group. Her blood seemed to run backward. Blackwood was one of the world's largest real estate and interior design conglomerates, infamous for cold-blooded acquisitions, and its CEO. The conference room doors swung open. A tall man walked in, clad in a fitted black suit, his tie perfectly knotted, dark hair neatly styled, gray eyes, steady, but carrying a force that seemed to weigh down the entire room. Adrian Blackwood. The world is split in two. The image of him in glowing cat ears at duty-free, fumbling with a massage chair, their hands touching against airport glass at sunrise, all overlapped with the cold, commanding figure before her. Now. Clara's grip on the folder tightened, her nails digging into the cardboard. "No, it can't be," she whispered. Adrian's gaze swept the parlor table and landed on hers. For a fleeting moment, something flickered at the corner of his mouth, but then came the familiar impassive mask of a CEO. He sat at the head of the table, opened his laptop, and spoke in a steady baritone. "Let's begin." The negotiations were tense. Blackwood's advisors laid down rigid terms, acquiring Carter Design, retaining certain projects, but all the control would fall under Blackwood. Her father, appearing via video call, remained silent, his aged eyes filled with worry. Clara steadied her voice as she argued, "Carter Design is not just a company. It's a family brand, a legacy built over 30 years. If it's simply absorbed, all of that spirit disappears." Adrian listened, his expression softening for a brief second, before hardening again. He didn't refute, and heard directly, only said, "Blackwood Group respects that value, but to survive, Carter needs a bigger roof over its head." A roof, the word sounded like a promise, yet cold as a verdict. Clara bit her lip, her chest aching. He was the faded man she had kissed at dawn, and the same man who could destroy her family's future. At that moment, the doors opened again. Another man entered, wearing a sharp suit and smiling like a blade. Richard Grant, the CEO of a long-time rival design firm. "Apologies for being late," Richard said, though his eyes lit with interest when they landed on Clara. He pulled out a chair and laid a folder on the table. "Either brought some interesting news from this morning's press." The room fell into silence. Richard slid out several newspapers. On the front page was a blurry but recognizable photo. Adrian and Clara sitting side by side at the airport's glass wall, teacups in hand, and the sunrise glowing behind them. The bold headline read, "Blackwood CEO stages 24-hour airport game to woo Carter heiress. Charm tactic before takeover." Clara froze. Whispers broke out around the table. Several representatives leaned in, eyes full of suspicion toward her. On the screen, her father furrowed his brows in pain. Richard smirked, voice sweet, but cutting. "How clever, isn't it? Crafting a so-called faded encounter? Building trust, then smoothly swallowing Carter. Design a perfect psychological game." Clara's hands trembled. The sweet memories of those 24 hours. Silly laughter, claw machine prizes, a kiss at mooded sunrise, suddenly warped into evidence of a premeditated scheme. She turned to Adrian, tears brimming in her eyes. "Is it true?" Adrian opened his mouth, ready to speak, but Richard cut in. "Of course, he'll deny it. But think, why would a CEO as busy as Adrian Blackwood waste an place entire night at an airport with a stranger?" The air grew suffocating. All eyes pinned Adrian. He met Clara's gaze, gray eyes torn. "No, it's not like that. You have to believe me." But in her dazed panic, Clara's heart split apart. She shot to her feet, the chair screeching. "You deceived me," she choked. "Everything was just a game." The room fell silent. Only Richard sat there, his wicked smile widening, while Clara clutched her and folded to her chest and stormed out. The door slammed behind her, leaving Adrian alone in the swell of suspicion and whispers rising like a storm tide. Out in the corridor, Clara's vision blurred with tears. They slid freely, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. What hurt most wasn't the threat of losing the company, but the thought that those 24 beautiful hours had been nothing but a stage, and she, the naive, lead in someone else's play. She quickened her pace, leaving behind the Paris sunlight streaming through the glass light that no longer held warmth for her. The news spread like wildfire. By that afternoon, industry outlets across the board were plastered with the same clandestine photo, Adrian Blackwood and Clara Carter by the airport glass, the wall dawn behind them, the two seemingly smiling at each other. The sensational headline appeared everywhere. "Blackwood, CEO's love game. Carter heiress becomes prey and takeover deal." Each word stabbed Clara's heart like a knife. She sat frozen in her hotel room, her phone lighting up with countless messages, colleagues half doubting, friends asking questions, even distant acquaintances sending sarcastic congratulations. She switched the phone off, clenching her hands tightly. Every sweet memory of those 24 hours, the clumsy laughter when he wore cat ears, the warmth of his jacket over her shoulders, their sunrise kiss now twisted into fragments of a cruel script. "So, I was just a pawn," she whispered, voice breaking. The door burst open. Adrian strode in, ignoring protests from his assistant and the front desk, his grey eyes fixed on Clara's pale face. "Clara, don't call me that." She shot to her feet, backing toward the window. "So, all of it was just to make it easier for you to ruin my family's company." Her voice cracked, raw with hurt and anger. Adrian halted, his eyes darkening. "No, never. You have, and to believe me. The airport had nothing to do with the deal. Nothing to do with it." She let out a bitter laugh, tears spilling. "We coincidentally missed the same flight. Coincidentally made a 24-hour pact. Coincidentally shared all those sweet moments. And then I discovered you're the CEO trying to devour Carter Design. And right at that moment, a rival conveniently leaks a story claiming you staged it all. That's all just a coincidence." She shook her head, choking on the words. "Do you think I'm that naive?" Adrian took a step forward, his voice urgent. "You are the only one. The only thing that's made me want to step outside the CEO mask. Never enough." Clara cut him off, her hand trembling. "You want me to believe in you, but can you deny that Blackwood Group is trying to swallow my father's company? Can you say right here and now that you'll stop the deal?" Adrian opened his mouth, but the words stuck in his throat. Before he could answer, Clara's gaze shattered. "See?" she whispered, retreating further. "It's all just a power play." She spun, yanking the door latch. "I was a fool to believe in fate." Adrian stood frozen. The door clicked shut, the sound like a period, marking the end. Inside his chest, a hollow spread wide, swallowing every word left unsaid. He wanted to chase after her, to shout that Richard had orchestrated everything, that none of it was staged. But his feet felt glued to the carpet, his hands clenched white. He looked around the now empty room, a cold cup of tea on the table, echoing that morning at sunrise. A sharp pain pierced through his chest. "No, it's not like that," he murmured to the silence. "I never lied to you." But Clara was already gone. Clara stepped out into the streets of Paris. The smell of fresh bread from a corner boulangerie drifting past, but not enough to soften her heart. The city of light glowed brilliantly, yet to her it was veiled in stinging fog. She pulled her scarf higher, trying to hide the tears streaming down. In her mind, his words replayed. "If we meet again beyond these in 24 hours, would you dare to gamble?" She had nodded. She had gambled with her whole heart, and now it felt like she had lost everything. The rumors spread like an uncontrollable storm. Every paper, every blog repeated the phrase, 24-hour airport game as evidence of Adrian Blackwood's scheme to take over. Blackwood Group's stock fluctuated, but what hurt Adrian more than market shifts was the look in Clara's eyes as she turned away from him, wounded, furious, and worst of all, stripped of trust. He couldn't sit still. That very night, Adrian summoned his private security and legal teams. He wanted to trace the source of the photo and the Broad article. Every link in the media chain was thoroughly examined. Anonymous emails, fake accounts, and the trail of ad payments. 24 hours later, the truth emerged. All roads led back to Richard Grant, the same man who had walked into the meeting room with that sly smile who've been the one to hire paparazzi to tail Adrian at the airport, snap the photo, and spin it into the stage destiny story. His goal to sabotage Carter, design and tarnish Blackwood's reputation while driving a wedge between Adrian and Clara. Adrian gripped the folder of evidence so tightly the vein stood out on his hands. Rage burned through him, but beneath it lay something sharper. Pain. Clara had believed the lie. He stood before his office window, Paris's golden avenues glowing below. Her words echoed in his head. "So all of this was just to make it easier for you to ruin my family's company." He wanted to rip apart the distance between them, to shout that she was wrong, but he knew no words could erase the wound left when trust collapsed. The next day, Adrian went to Carter Design's Paris office. The Meeting room was small, lit by cold, white light, drafting sheets spread across the table. Clara was there, alongside her father and colleagues. She froze when she saw him, her eyes both steely and guarded. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cold as ice. "To give you the truth," Adrian replied, laying the folder on the table. "The one who spread the story wasn't me. It was Richard Grant. He staged the whole filthy trick to sabotage Carter and discredit me." Her father frowned, carefully, flipping through the pages. The evidence was undeniable. Emails, invoices, proxy, accounts. But Clara stayed silent. She stood straight, fist clenched, her gaze locked on him. Even if Richard spread the rumor, the fact remains. The Blackwood Group still intends to acquire Carter Design, and you are still the man leading that deal. "I never wanted to destroy Carter," Adrian said, stepping closer, his voice tightening. "I want to, partner. I want to preserve the value your father built. Clara, you have to believe." She let out a hollow laugh, tears brimming in her eyes. "I did believe. I gambled on you, and what I got back was humiliation in front of my family and colleagues." "No." Adrian's voice cracked with desperation. "What had happened at the airport? It was real. Every laugh, every minute beside you, and that kiss, none of it was a performance." The room grew thick with silence. Colleagues quietly slipped out, leaving. Only the three of them. Her father laid a hand on her shoulder, but Clara brushed it aside, her eyes never leaving. "Adrian, you say it was real," she whispered, "but my family is standing on the edge. If you truly care about me, why can't you stop the takeover right now?" Adrian froze. He could do it. Call it off, lose hundreds of millions, face shareholder fury. But if he did, would Clara truly believe his feelings, or would she think it was just another ploy to win her back? His silence lasted a heartbeat too long, and that silence broke Clara's heart all over again. She shook her head, turning away. "See, I can't trust you." "Clara," Adrian rasped. He stepped forward as if to reach for side at her hand, but the space between them stretched impossibly wide. She turned back, eyes red. "Let me protect my company. Don't interfere anymore. Between us, it's over." As Clara left, the white lights washed down on her thin shoulders, making her look smaller than ever. Adrian stood rooted, his hands limp, his chest gripped as though by an iron fist. He had uncovered the truth, proven his innocence. Yet the one thing he lost was the only thing that mattered, her trust. His heart tore in, too. On one side, the cold reason of a CEO. On the other hand, the woman who had made him believe in fate. He knew if he didn't find a way, he would lose her forever. And for Adrian Blackwood, that was something he could never accept. The hall was packed with reporters. On stage, Richard Grant stood tall, his never missing of, face triumphant. Before him, cameras were non-stop, flashes exploding like fireworks. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice booming like a prosecutor's, "I am here today to expose the true faces of Carter Design and Blackwood Group." He lifted a photograph. It showed Claire and Adrian sitting by, the airport glass, dawn light framing in them, their hands nearly touching. Enlarged behind him, bold red letters. Read, "24-hour love, $1 billion deal." Richard's cold smile cut through the silence. Carter Design was once the legacy of Mr. Carter. But now, because of a fleeting romance, young Clara Carter has naively handed it over to Adrian Blackwood, a girl who places a blind love above her father's legacy. How can such a company still deserve your trust? The room erupted with whispers. Many eyes turned toward Clara, seated quietly in the front row, full of pity and doubt, her heart clenched. Each of Richard's words carved into her dignity and into her father's name. No, Clara whispered, but her voice was drowned in the noise. Richard delivered the final blow. If Blackwood Group is allowed to swallow Carter Design, you will all witness a tragedy. 30 years of legacy destroyed, and the culprit, none other than a girl weakened by blind love. The doors of the hall swung open. Adrian strode in, tall, straight, the golden lights sharpening the steel of his face. His presence silenced the room. For a heartbeat, he walked straight to the stage, stopped beside Richard, and spoke in a voice that cut through the crowd. "I have a truth to tell." Richard sneered. "Oh, has the mighty CEO come to confess?" Adrian turned toward the reporters, his eyes hard, but his voice low and steady. "Carter Design was never a target for takeover. I sought a partnership because I respect the values of family poured into it. I have never and will never coerce or deceive Clara Carter." He paused, then looked directly at her. His voice softened, but every word struck deep. "The only thing I truly want is Clara." Cameras exploded with flashes. Reporters surged forward, microphones raised high, but Clara sat, frozen. His words pierced the wall of anger in her chest. Her heart trembled, but her mind screamed, "He's a CEO. He knows how to wield words like weapons." Richard laughed bitterly. "Bravo, a love profession at a press conference. But what do you all think? A shrewd CEO and a naive girl. Just another staged romance to cover a deal." The hall roared again. Clara rose, eyes shimmering. She looked at Adrian, her voice shaking. "If you truly respect Carter Design, then can you stop the deal immediately?" Adrian faltered. Shareholder pressure, corporate duty, all spun in his head, but he did not say no. He stepped forward, his voice breaking. "I will find a way, Clara, but please believe this. Feeling has never been a lie." She shook her head, tears spilling. "Can't." She turned and walked out, flashes blinding, leaving Adrian standing stunned under the glare. Days later, in Carter Design's warmly lit office, Mr. Carter sat across from Adrian, his silver hair hung over his brow, eyes sharp yet calm. On the table lay the file Adrian had brought, a plan for partnership, not takeover. "Mr. Blackwood," Mr. Carter began slowly, "I've read this. If it holds true, Carter Design will remain in my family's hands while gaining your corporation support." "That's right," Adrian said firmly. "I don't want to consume Carter. I want it to keep its soul, while Blackwood becomes its foundation." Mr. Carter nodded slightly, then met Adrian's eyes. "I am not blind. I know you care about my daughter." Adrian bowed his head, faintly, not denying it. "You must understand," Mr. Carter continued. "Clara carries too much weight. She believes that one misstep is a betrayal of me. She is afraid, not because you are unworthy, but because she hasn't yet learned how to place her own happiness beside the burden of family." He sighed, his voice softening. "I spent my life building Carter Design, but my true legacy isn't walls or projects. It's for my daughter to live happily. If you are sincere, be patient. And as for my daughter," he turned as Clara entered the fine doorway, her eyes still swollen. "Remember this. I can protect the company with intellect and faith, but your heart, only you can protect it." Clara froze, her chest tightening. Her father had just given her something she had never dared believe: the right to love, not as betrayal, but as part of the family's legacy. She looked at Adrian. In his eyes, she no longer saw the cold CEO, but the man who had fumbled with a Conscade massage chair, who had worn cat ears just to make her laugh, who had draped a grotta jacket over her shoulders in the airport night. Her heart tore between duty and longing, but for the first time she felt the ties binding her begin to loosen. Paris, in the late afternoon, was draped in the pale grey of rain just past. The cobblestone streets glistened, the first golden lamps flickering on along the boulevard. Inside, Carter Design's small Paris office, tucked on the third floor of an old stone building. Clara sat motionless at the conference table. Before her lay a stack of files, blueprints she had once been proud of. Now they felt like a weight pressing on her chest. She folded each sheet and slipped it into her case, her hands trembling slightly. A part of her longed to board the next plane out of Paris, to escape the stares, the whispers, and, most of all, Adrian Blackwood. "Daughter." Her father's voice came from behind, warm yet steady. "Are you planning to run away again?" Clara, startled, and turned. Mr. Carter stood by the window, his frame thin, but his eyes unwavering. He came closer, laying a weathered hand on her shoulder. "I've seen enough," he said slowly. "Adrian is not the enemy. Grant is the one who he wants to destroy us. Adrian, he wants to walk forward with us." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "But father, what if I've trusted the wrong man? What if it was all an act?" Mr. Carter shook his head. "I've spent a lifetime in negotiations. I know when a man speaks the truth. Adrian looks at you with a man's eyes, not a CEO's. You may doubt yourself, but don't deny that truth." Before Clara could reply, the door swung open. Adrian entered. He wasn't in his usual dark suit, only a white shirt with sleeves rolled up, his tie loose. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear, resolute. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, meeting Clara's gaze. "But I can't let you leave, thinking I deceived you." The air thickened. Clara clutched the case tighter, her voice breaking. "What more is there to say, Adrian? At the press conference, you made everyone believe. But I wasn't performing." Adrian cut in, taking a step closer. "I investigated. I presented the evidence that Richard had set it all up. But more than that, I need you to understand. I could lose my company, but I cannot lose you." Clara's heart tightened. His words were raw, but fear still tangled within her. "You don't understand. I've always been afraid of betraying father. If I choose you, would that mean putting love above my family?" "No," came another voice. Deep, steady, her father's. He stepped between them, eyes soft yet firm. "Daughter, I've held this company for 30 years, and I will continue to guard it with intellect and trust. But your happiness, that's not something I can guard for you." He turned to Adrian with a small nod. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe your intentions. You've proven you seek partnership, not conquest. The rest lies with my daughter." Mr. Carter left, closing the first door softly, leaving a silence between the two. Clara stood there, her heart pounding. Adrian moved closer, stopping just a breath away. "I know, you're still afraid," he whispered. "But remember, we once dared to gamble. Those 24 hours at the airport. You nodded when I asked if we meet again. Would you dare?" Clara bit her lip. The memory of that sunrise washed over her. Orange, light, a warm hand, a gentle kiss. Her heart ached, then softened. "I did nod," she admitted quietly. "But I'm still so scared, Adrian." He reached for her hand and held it. This time with no space between. "I'm scared too, scared of losing you. But love isn't a game. It's a decision. And I've decided this time I won't let us miss our chance." Clara looked down at their joined hands. Warmth flowed through her, melting away, the ice of doubt. She lifted her gaze, her eyes glistening. "This time, no more missed chances," she whispered. A tear, sliding down like a seal on her words. Adrian drew her into his arms. They held each other for a long time, as if making up for the days lost to misunderstanding. Outside, Paris's church bells told their rhythm merging with the steady beat of their hearts. New York in summer was bathed in golden light. In a small garden on the outskirts, white flowers and twinkling lights decorated a simple yet intimate wedding. Not the glittering extravagance expected of billionaires, but a ceremony filled with love, sincerity, and only the dearest faces. After months of storms, Carter Design stood firm. Now a strategic partner of Blackwood Group, Adrian kept his promise. No takeover, no eraser of legacy, only growth side by side. For Clara, it was the clearest proof of his love. When the music began, Clara, radiant in a white gown, walked down the flowered aisle. Her eyes found Adrian, waiting at the end, tall, steadfast. His smile meant only for her. With every step, her heart beat as it had that fateful morning at the airport. At the moment of exchanging rings, Clara gripped his hand, her voice trembling and with emotion. The flight I missed that day was the one that led me to the right man. Adrian tightened his hold, eyes shining beneath the lights. He leaned down to kiss her, a kiss as long as a vow. No more temporary 24 hours. This is forever. Applause erupted as the chapel doors opened. They stepped outside just as fireworks lit up the New York sky. The brilliant bursts reflected in their eyes, framing their joyous smiles. Amid the cheers of friends and family, Adrian bent and whispered in his wife's ear, "This time, there's no flight to miss. Only us and the journey of a lifetime." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, smiling. Deep inside, she knew fate had once made her miss a flight, only to bring her to a love she would never lose.